join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
The arrival of European settlers in the Americas marked a monumental turning point in world history, not only for the colonizers but also for the indigenous peoples who had lived on these lands for thousands of years. This meeting of vastly different cultures was fraught with complexities, misunderstandings, and, ultimately, profound consequences. The reactions of Native Americans to the first European settlers were as diverse as the cultures and societies that inhabited the Americas, ranging from curiosity and cautious cooperation to resistance and conflict. Each group's response was shaped by their unique circumstances, including their social structures, worldviews, and initial encounters with Europeans. When the first European ships arrived on the shores of the Americas, many Native American communities initially reacted with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. In regions where the indigenous peoples had no prior knowledge of outsiders, the sight of massive ships with sails towering like clouds above the water was nothing short of extraordinary. The Europeans brought objects that seemed alien yet fascinating to the Native Americans, such as steel tools, firearms, glass beads, and textiles. These items were often seen as valuable, and in many cases, indigenous peoples were eager to engage in exchanges, believing they could benefit from trade with the newcomers. In the Caribbean, the Arawak and Taino peoples were among the first to encounter Christopher Columbus and his crew in 1492. Their initial response was one of hospitality. Accounts from Columbus's journals describe the indigenous people as generous, offering food, water, and other resources to the explorers. They showed an openness to learn about the strange visitors and their customs, albeit tempered by a degree of caution. However, this initial goodwill was often misunderstood by the Europeans as subservience or naivety, setting the stage for exploitative relationships. In other parts of the Americas, indigenous reactions were equally varied. Along the eastern seaboard of North America, coastal tribes like the Wampanoag and Powhatan observed the early English settlers with both interest and skepticism. While some groups saw opportunities for alliances and trade, others viewed the newcomers with suspicion, perceiving them as potential threats to their land and resources. These mixed responses reflected the diversity of Native American societies, which ranged from nomadic bands to highly organized agricultural civilizations. One of the defining features of the early interactions between Native Americans and European settlers was trade. Indigenous peoples had long established trade networks, and they integrated the Europeans into these systems, initially viewing them as another group of potential trading partners. The exchange of goods created a temporary sense of mutual benefit. Native Americans acquired new tools, weapons, and goods that enhanced their daily lives, while Europeans gained access to food, furs, and geographical knowledge that were essential for survival in the New World. For example, the fur trade became a cornerstone of early relations between Native Americans and Europeans, particularly in the northern regions of North America. Tribes such as the Huron, Algonquin, and Iroquois quickly adapted to the demand for beaver pelts, which were highly prized in Europe for hat-making. The Europeans' reliance on indigenous knowledge and skills to navigate the vast wilderness initially fostered a degree of cooperation. However, these relationships were often marked by underlying tensions, as the demand for furs intensified competition among tribes and altered traditional hunting practices. In some cases, alliances were formed between Native Americans and European settlers. These alliances were often strategic, driven by the indigenous people's desire to leverage the newcomers' military power against rival tribes. For instance, the Huron allied with the French during the early 17th century to counterbalance the Iroquois Confederacy, who had aligned with the Dutch and later the English. Such partnerships were complex and often fraught with mutual suspicion, but they underscore the agency of Native Americans in navigating these early interactions. Despite moments of cooperation, the relationship between Native Americans and Europeans was precarious. The introduction of European goods disrupted traditional economies and created dependencies that would later prove detrimental to indigenous communities. Furthermore, the Europeans' desire for land and resources often clashed with the Native Americans' understanding of land stewardship, leading to conflicts that undermined initial attempts at coexistence. The profound cultural differences between Native Americans and Europeans were a significant source of tension during their early encounters. Native American societies were incredibly diverse, but many shared common values such as communal ownership of land, a deep spiritual connection to nature, and complex kinship systems. These values were often incomprehensible to the Europeans, whose worldview was shaped by hierarchical social structures, private property, and a desire for economic exploitation. One of the most glaring points of misunderstanding was the concept of land ownership. To most Native American societies, land was a shared resource, not something to be bought, sold, or owned outright. This perspective was deeply rooted in their spiritual beliefs, which often emphasized harmony with the natural world and a sense of responsibility to future generations. In contrast, European settlers viewed land as a commodity to be claimed, cultivated, and exploited. This fundamental difference led to numerous disputes and, eventually, violent conflicts as settlers encroached on indigenous territories. Religious differences also played a significant role in shaping early interactions. Many Europeans arrived with a missionary zeal, believing it was their divine duty to convert the heathen peoples of the New World to Christianity. Native Americans, however, had rich spiritual traditions that were deeply woven into their daily lives. The Europeans' attempts to impose their beliefs were often met with resistance, as indigenous peoples sought to preserve their cultural identities in the face of relentless proselytization. In some cases, Native Americans incorporated elements of Christianity into their own practices, creating syncretic traditions. However, this blending of beliefs was rarely recognized or respected by European missionaries, who viewed such adaptations as heretical. As the intentions of the European settlers became increasingly clear, many Native American groups shifted from cautious cooperation to active resistance. The settlers' insatiable appetite for land and resources, combined with their disregard for indigenous ways of life, left many tribes with little choice but to defend their sovereignty through force. One of the earliest and most notable instances of resistance occurred in the Powhatan Confederacy, which dominated the region around the English settlement of Jamestown in Virginia. Initially, the Powhatan leader Wahunsinkaw, known as Chief Powhatan, sought to integrate the English settlers into his network of tributary tribes. However, the settlers' growing demands for food and land led to a series of conflicts, culminating in the Anglo-Powhatan Wars. These wars highlighted the devastating impact of European colonization on Native American societies, as the Powhatan population was decimated by violence, disease, and displacement. Further north, the Pequot War of 1636 to 1638 marked another significant moment of resistance. The Pequot people, who had controlled much of the trade in present-day Connecticut, found themselves increasingly marginalized by English settlers and their native allies. The war culminated in the Mystic Massacre, where English forces and their allies burned a Pequot village, killing hundreds of men, women, and children. This brutal event signaled the lengths to which European settlers were willing to go to secure their dominance. Throughout the Americas, indigenous resistance took many forms, from armed conflict to subtle acts of defiance. Some tribes engaged in guerrilla warfare, using their intimate knowledge of the land to outmaneuver European forces. Others formed coalitions, such as the Iroquois Confederacy, which played a pivotal role in shaping the balance of power in the northeastern United States. These acts of resistance underscored the resilience and determination of Native American peoples to defend their cultures, lands, and ways of life. Perhaps the most catastrophic consequence of European colonization was the introduction of Old World diseases to the Americas. Native American populations had no immunity to diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza, which spread rapidly and decimated entire communities. Scholars estimate that diseases killed as much as 90% of the indigenous population in some regions, creating a demographic collapse that profoundly altered the balance of power between Native Americans and Europeans. The devastating impact of disease often undermined Native American resistance efforts, as communities were weakened both physically and socially. Leaders and elders, who were crucial for maintaining cultural continuity, were among the many victims, leaving survivors struggling to rebuild their societies. Despite these immense challenges, many Native American groups adapted to the new realities of their world, finding ways to preserve their traditions and maintain their autonomy in the face of overwhelming odds. The reactions of Native Americans to the first European settlers were as varied and complex as the societies themselves. While some sought cooperation and trade, others resisted fiercely, recognizing the existential threat posed by the newcomers. These early encounters set the stage for centuries of conflict, negotiation, and adaptation, as indigenous peoples navigated the profound changes brought by European colonization. Even in the face of devastating losses, Native American communities demonstrated remarkable resilience and creativity. They preserved their cultures through storytelling, art, and other forms of expression, ensuring that their histories and perspectives endured. The legacy of these first encounters continues to shape the Americas today, serving as a testament to the enduring strength and diversity of Native American peoples.